Well, I was born in Edmonton in North London, and it was in 32. It was a lot time of unemployment and lots of hassle going on, and very poor people and very low wages, and quite a different world to in which we live today. But I'm glad that I've lived this long and they have been able to put it down and write it down in a book for my grandchildren. So my son was ever so clever. We managed to read my horrible writing and wrote all these sections of the book: my life, his life, married life, and coming to have the children, and things for them to remember. So they've all got one of those.
And it's all contained in this book. Could you have a little flick through it from the start and see what you can pick out to talk about? Just a little visual reminder there. How many brothers and sisters did you have?
I've got 2 sisters. They're both living. The very serious little girl, which is me. I've got a photograph here of my father with a handkerchief round his head up at Baddow somewhere, where my granddad lived when he was alive, and with some of my cousins, and they're standing in a cornfield and beating the corn where the rabbits are just going to run out. So that's very, it dates everything, where the clothes they're wearing and the way they used to harvest the corn. In about 1936 we moved house because my father got a job, a good job with a building firm, and he was clerk of the works. So we had to live in a farmhouse called Astwood Farm, a big Victorian farmhouse with an outside loo, and very, very primitive, but it was very big too. My mother's carpet looked like a postage stamp in the middle of the room we lived in, and it was very exciting. I remember it so well. And my father using a scythe in the garden. It was a beautiful Victorian garden, but it needed tidying up. We had 2 lawns, and actually the house faced away from the road. I think because there was a lane behind it, it probably at some time was used as a road. So we had 2 ways. We could go out the back and go down the lane into near the shops. We're very thrilled, my sisters and I. We had 2 servants' rooms and back stairs down to the kitchen, and I think the back of the house must have been much older than the front, because it looked Victorian from the front. But that was wonderful. So I felt that was a really nice part of growing up. So we lived there for about 18 months, and then of course the houses began to get nearer and nearer. There was a building on the plot. And so we knew we'd have to. Well, we bought a house. My father bought a house, one of the houses they were building, in the same road. So much to our sorrow, the old house was gradually pulled down, and all was left of it that we recognised was a walnut tree in the garden. I'd never seen walnuts before. Never seen them when they were green inside. The nuts were inside, but we waited till they ripened, and my mother spread them out on the lawn, and we pricked holes in them with a fork, and then she left them to dry, really dry, because it was hot weather. And then she made dozens and dozens of, I don't know whatever happened to them. She must have given them all away, but she made dozens of pickled walnuts. So my sister and I were very happy playing there. We had, of course, what I'd always lived in a town, and a very towny town. It wasn't countryside at all, and this was all marvellous vista of things I'd never seen before. We had an orchard beside the house, and there's a picture of me on a horse. It was called Dolly. She lived in the field, just temporarily for a man along the road. And well, actually, I went in when I was a year older, I had a crash course in riding, borrowed some riding clothes, and went in for the local horse show, but I didn't win anything, and I was very uncomfortable really, because you can't learn to ride in a week. It was very stiff too, but that was an experience that came out of that. And as for Worcester itself, I lived there for 12 years. We stayed there because the war came, and my father wasn't called up, but he went to work in a factory, munitions factory. The city of Worcester itself, I'm so glad I had this lovely experience. We used to go for walks on a Sunday night usually, and walk down the town and back. It's about 2 miles, very hilly. But there's some lovely things like the cathedral, and that sticks in my memory. I was very moved when I went back to Worcester later in my life, and I saw the cathedral again, and behind the cathedral there were places where the monks used to live. There's all ruins, and I was very interested in history because I could imagine all the monks around the place, you know, how they used to live. So that was wonderful for me. It shaped my life. As the house was being pulled down, we had lots of empty cowsheds down the yard. And we got a pair of ducks from the farm opposite us, called Ronald and Donald. Although they kept going back to the farm, but eventually we got two to stay. And it was winter by then, and my father was very much a Londoner. He didn't know anything about the country, although my mother wasn't. She was a country girl. But he took them in and shut them in a cowshed when it got cold, and he very kindly put a big candle on the top of a flower pot for them to eat their dinner. He didn't know anything about animals or birds, so that was quite a laugh. And I went to the local school, which was St Barnabas, Church of England school, and my 4 teachers were Miss Yule, Miss Blackwell, Miss Davis, and Mrs Charles. She passed us each day on her bicycle, and it was just a funny thing to see her. She used to have ever such large teeth, and she used to grin at us all as she went past. But there again, the characters that you meet. But I'll just say briefly. At school, I've got the things we used in the classroom. Slate and pencil. We had little trays with sand in, and we used to write with our fingers. And sand tray and ink wells, because we all used ink, and there was a round ink well with a toll in the top, and it fitted into the very primitive school desk, and a little curve where you put your pencil down. It was very nice. I'm so pleased I can remember all that, because this is a different world altogether, and people don't know what you're talking about. You talk about things, they say, you know, it's only about 20 years ago, and you think, oh, and then you realise that you've been living on this earth for 87 years, and of course we have to be careful what we say, because they think we're all old fogies, but they don't realise what a wealth of knowledge we have about the past, the recent past. And the district nurse used to go around. We used to think, well, some people used to think the babies were bought in the bag on the back of the bike, and we had a nice little house. Well, I think we were among probably the first ordinary people who bought houses, and when we left it to come back to London to Dad's family after the war, we sold it for £375. Can you imagine? That it doesn't seem possible, does it? We packed our car up when the war started, and that wasn't worth much after, because it was only a little Singer car. But that was a very happy time there. Now, shall I tell you about the Brickfieldites? I've got a pitch. I've drawn some very funny looking people, you know, very sort of dishevelled and patched and poor, and you don't see people like that except people that really live rough now. But at that time there was a place called Dolday down in Worcester, which was a no-go area for anybody, because you could get beaten up or steal things off you. Just tenements they were. They looked filthy. The policemen went down there in twos, and there was a lot of crime, and well, you can imagine it. Poor people, it wasn't their fault that they had to live in these awful circumstances and had no way of really making their way in the world. But just then, council houses came into being. People that lived in Dalday were much feared by us town folk, especially children walking along, because they lived in such squalor that they were almost inhuman. They didn't know anything. They didn't go to school. They'd never been employed in anything reasonable, and somehow or other, just as today's homeless, they've got left behind, and it seemed that nobody cared. But I'm glad to say that in 1939 they had been building an estate near us, and it was all council houses that was called brickfields. So all these dear people who got nothing were moved into this big estate, and it must have been wonderful. It was said that they kept their coal in the bath, and they didn't know what the bath was. So, you know, there's lots of things you heard about it, but none of us went up there. We daren't. It was sort of too dangerous. You didn't know whether children and people were going to come and shout at you or hit you or throw stones at you. But the thing was, I and my friends, we used to roam around the countryside a bit, because there was no danger from anything really, and especially during the war, when all the men had gone to the war and we knew practically everybody in the district. Anyway, we used to get going on nice walks, and all of a sudden you'd see a gang of Brickfieldites coming, and we didn't despise them, we were just frightened of them. And I've drawn a picture of some of them, what I remember of them. And of course they weren't all like that on the council estate. Most of them, I suppose, were, well, just ordinary people like you and me, and they were proud of their homes. They did a good job, and they were cheerful and got on with life. So it was good to think that they'd got homes where gradually they learnt to live in the modern time, and had got jobs, and you know, they were able to live a life of some sort of normality. Oh, there's a picture here of a boy bowling a hoop along with a stick, and every spring, this was the same every spring, we went through a series of games. And we used to have, I think the first one was marbles. We used to roll marbles along the gutter. Everybody had a homemade bag of marbles, and you had to try and hit somebody else's marble, and then you had it yourself, you see. And there's some children had one, but marvellous. They got so many marbles, and these prize ones were called a sixer or a tenner, or however many marbles they'd hit. We had playing ball. We all played ball up against the wall. That was one thing. And I've got a funny rhyme here. At least I thought it was funny. It's very old. It's been used for centuries, I suppose. Plainsy, just throw and catch. Clapsy, one clap and catch. Swizzlesy, rotate your hands and catch. Tabalcony, whatever that was, clap the front and back of yourself before catching the ball. High satina, low satina, throw high, throw low, touch your heel, catch, touch your toe, catch, touch the ground, catch, around you turn, and you turned yourself round and hopefully caught the ball at the end. That's one thing. And whip and top, they have things called tops, that we had a stick with a piece of string fixed on it, and just quite a sturdy bit of string, and you got down, put your top on the ground and whipped it like this until it started to spin, and then you could keep it going for ages when you got clever at it. So that was another one. And
what about hopscotch?
Oh, well, I never played hopscotch, but I think it was because we didn't have any paving stones or smooth pavements. Because when the war came, the pavements got in a shocking state anyway. But no, it wasn't really sort of the kind of place. In a town you would have played it, not in the road. But
hide and seek.
Didn't play that. Pardon?
Hide and seek and om pom save all.
Oh yes, hide and seek. And we used to sing in infant school. poor Jenny is a weeping. We all went around in a circle, and there was some sort of little ritual, and people ran backwards and forwards. The wind, the wind, the wind blows high. There was another one too. I remember the song. All kinds of things that we did, which were different to perhaps other parts of the country. A great fun. And
what's that collection of drawings? That collection. Tell me about those people.
Well, this is to illustrate what hairstyles were like, more or less, and what people wore on their heads, what they did to their hair, what they wore underneath their clothes, and anything that sort of occurred to me, really. There's a shingled hair. There's a picture of hairs that's shingled, which probably you know, it's quite up at the back, and it is done a lot nowadays, but it in between now and then it was just a shingle. You couldn't have didn't have any kind of cut really good. And then another one was a bobbed hair, just cut round with a ribbon on the top of your head. Men had always short back and sides and creamed back with Brill cream or something like that. Then there was, in the war, that girls that worked in factories used to wear their hair in a snood, and that's a sort of a net which you put all your hair in the net and have it, you know, nearly covered it up. So I suppose that kept it clean and kept it out of the way. Page boy style, which was my style. An underroll, long hair around the shoulders, an underroll. And then there was an awful style that people had. You could only have your hair curled a certain way. And there was one called an iron wave. Can you imagine tongs over somebody's head, and they look like this all round and very fierce. Mostly older ladies had that, and then some didn't have any style at all. It just they had pigtails. That was another one, but it didn't have ponytails. And then there was underclothes. One was called a Liberty bodice. In 1940, I think I wore one of those. That was 4 suspenders attached to a bodice, which was really nice. It was kind of fleecy lined, so you wore that, and then a vest under that. Boys, long socks, school caps, always wore a cap. And then the pixie hoods were made from a straight piece of material. Then the underclothes, you may not be interested at all, but I always remember this because when we sat in school, you could see what colour Mrs. Knickers were, and somebody at the front used to say, "She's wearing blue today," or pink. So horrible things we used to wear, very, very unattractive really. Children wore we wore knickers with legs in, and they had a little pocket inside where you kept your hanky, of all things. But not very exciting, you know. It was we had a pocket for a hanky. Garments worn by men and boys and girls sometimes, combinations, and they were all in one vest and long pants right past the knees. Of course, that was lovely and warm in the winter. But there again, most unglamorous.
Sounds like an Edwardian bathing costume, wasn't
yes,
it?
A bit. Yes, a bit. It was. It only had a few frills, and it would look the same. It covered you up completely. So that was that. I have a ration book here from the wartime, or it's a print of one, and I remember when rationing came in, because I was 7 when the war started, so I was quite canny and I could piece things together quite well. And we went on awfully short rations, so much margarine, only a very little butter. I don't remember how much butter, but we had 1 egg a week and about 2 slices of bacon a week. That's for the whole family. But one thing was quite plentiful, but it was nice, but it wasn't very useful. It was jam. Mother made loads and loads of jam, and we were allowed extra sugar so she could do that. And she bottled fruit in large jars with a lid on, a screw-on lid, you put the fruit in, which we had pears, apples, and all sorts of plums and damsons. Because being in the Worcester countryside, we had masses of fruit. She used to put them. I think she put them in the water. That's right, in the water in the jar, and then she stood it in a big saucepan. She stood several jars in a saucepan, and you boiled them for so long, and in which times they part cooked. They weren't sort of a bit mushy, and then we had shelves and shelves of them and shelves of jam, which was always useful. Her butcher's shop was empty. So we went in there and the butcher was standing there saying, "What do you want, madam?" And we had such a small meat ration, but we've never had a joint of anything during the war. And I think once at the end of the war we did manage to get a chicken. So we didn't have any chickens or frozen meat like we have today. And the one thing I liked was corned beef. That was nice. My mother, you'll be sick at this, she used to cook a sheep's head, because being a country woman, that's what they used to eat. They used to eat everything. And I couldn't bear to eat it now, but we thought it was lovely, because there was all little bits of meat, and then the tongue and the brains. No, I couldn't eat it now, but it's amazing to think you did, because you were hungry. I mean, another thing she did was she used to boil tripe, which is a cow's stomach, inside stomach, and she used to boil it for about 5 hours with onions. It was quite, it was pleasant. There again, I wouldn't want it now.